Hey guys, here I am back with the second part of this series, and in this one, we are going to be checking on how I planned my shots and did the value comps. And along with that, we are also going to see some design principles and composition basics. And after that, we are going to move to Previs, and I'll tell you what Previs is and why you should include it in your pipeline and how it can help. And then finally, we'll move on to um, planning the assets and doing some basic modeling and texturing. And if you are someone who is just tuning in, I would recommend you check the first part, and link will be somewhere on the screen before watching this video. All right, let's get started. So let's go back to the story for a bit. So the first part of the story, or the first paragraph of the story, is mostly about setting up the premise of the story, and it has not much to do with how the shots were planned, but I want to highlight some important parts in the second and third paragraph. So if you go through the second and third paragraph, you can see that Roderick and Edmund are going from their home, which is a comfortable and happy place for them, to Stillscart Fortress, which is uncomfortable because there are monsters and unknown to them. So the journey is very contrasting from being happy to being unhappy, and also the conditions in Stillscart Fortress are very harsh and the expectations are grueling. So with these highlighted parts, we get the idea of how dark and how moody and gloomy the whole vibe is, and how sad it is for Roderick and Edmund. So with that in mind, I wrote down some of the very contrasting elements in my story uh, that really helped me build my shots. Happy and sad, like Kingdom, where their home is, it's happy, and Sisgard Fortress is going to be very sad and challenging for them. It's a contrast of known versus unknown, friendly versus unfriendly, and so on, like light and dark, free and trap. So if you have an idea and a story like this, then it's worth exploring the possibilities of such contrasting words that is gonna help you create your shots and plan your shots. Okay. All right. Moving on, I would like to go through a few very basic design principles and composition basics. So the first one is centralized comps, and it is generally said that you should avoid placing objects on the center of the screen, be it your horizon line or be it any character. But there are certain scenarios where centralized composition can also help achieve certain results. So use a centralized comp. So use a centralized comp when you want to have a very calm and relaxed vibe, all right? Or if it's something very mundane and symmetrical on both sides, or if it's something that signifies authority and power, for example, a leader or an architecture. Okay, so those are some of the uses of centralized compositions. The next is rule of thirds. I'm sure most of you already know it. It's basically just dividing your frame in a way that your subjects sit in these intersection points, or in other words, it's dividing a frame in a 70-30 or a 60-40 ratio, which also means avoiding the center. So rule of thirds is the second one. The third one is lines and motions. This is something to do with a bit of subconscious awareness, I would say. So if there's a straight line, then it signifies that things are very calm and stationary. All right, but if that same line is tilted, then it adds a bit of motion to the image or to your composition. So for example, think of it like this: if I place a ball on the straight line, then the ball will remain stationary because it has nowhere to go. But as soon as I tilt the line, the ball will start moving downwards, right? So with these simple example, you can add a lot of dynamic to your shot while doing your value comps or planning your shots. The next is rhythm and swooping lines, or what we call C curves and S curves. And these are really simple way of leading your viewers' eyes into your subject. As you can see in this very simple demo, I have a C curve here and an S curve here, and also a C curve on the sky. And for example, this is the subject, and all of those lines are going into the subject. And moving on, the fifth one I'd say is big, medium, small. So when we say big, medium, small, it just means that in your frame you have different volumes of objects, so that not all of the objects are getting equal amount of the real estate. Okay, it's about prioritizing one object, which is most probably your uh, main object or your focal point, and distribute the objects in the scene so that no two or three objects are of the same size, because that tends to make things a little bit boring, because then the viewer doesn't know where to look at, because every object is sort of getting the same amount of attention in that shot. All right, I hope that is a bit easy to understand. Then the next one is spacing and overlaps. Taking the same example as big, medium, small, spacing is just about avoiding equal spacing between the different objects in your scene, which again makes it boring. And this is something that I discussed in the first video as well, with the towers. It's about spacing your objects at a different distance from each other to make your scene more interesting. And this is where there's the opportunity to also add overlaps, which adds to the dynamism of the shot. And the next one is grouping and focal area. Grouping is all about designing your scene in a way that similar objects are grouped together so that the odd one becomes the focal area. Okay, so that's in a very simple terms, grouping and focal area. And the last one, but the biggest one, is contrast. Contrast is everything, and I would say find all the number of ways, think of all the number of ways that you can add contrast to your scene, and try to apply that logic in a way that your scene makes sense. Okay, so for example, I have a few very basic things laid down here. So if this is your shot and I have a circle there, a black circle on a white background, so that is value contrast, right? It's white versus black. And then if I show you this, then there's the color contrast, and also along with color contrast, it's big versus small. It's also size contrast. It's a big circle with a small square. Then there is lost versus found. So this is the lost edge, and here is the proper edge. So that is one way to add contrast. I mean, my eyes only go here and not here because there's nothing to see there, right? Then there is lost edges versus found edges. So there are numerous number of ways to add contrast to your scene and make your subject matter read more. And I would encourage you to think of all the number of ways that you can think about contrast, and make a list of all of those things and put it somewhere in the front of your table or wherever you work. And I have only showed like 8 principles here, and I don't think there's we can put a number to it. These principles are just formulas, and I believe that you learn the rules and then you break the rules. Okay, these are just some guides to help you get the most out of those principles or formulas. And I really hope that makes sense. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave any comment. These are such things that cannot be discussed in their full scope in a 20-minute or a 15 minutes YouTube video. Yeah. I hope this was helpful. And having discussed that, now let's move on to some of the value comps that I did for the project. Yeah, so it's always good to have an idea of the final product that you are planning to do. And in my case, since I know that 80% of the image is going to be in 3D, while doing this value comps, I'm only focusing on the framing of the characters and the composition of the shots here. Trying to stay very loose and not getting into any details at this point of time. I'm mostly focusing on simple design principles and composition techniques, such as avoiding the center of the frame with the horizon line and with the placement of the characters, and rule of thirds, C curve to lead the viewer to the image. And since I'm trying to tell a story with every keyframe, a lot of the things are also focused on symbolism, which is something that I really enjoy doing in my paintings. For example, the dead trees that I'm adding here suggest that Roderick and Edmund have left civilization and leaving things behind. You remember this top view diagram I talked about in the first part? They have crossed the forest, and what remains in front of them is cold, eerie, untrodden, and devoid of life. And that is why also I want the environment to be a character in itself in all of these keyframes. Also, another aspect of symbolism in these keyframes is the openness or the emptiness of the environment. And I also wanted that to be a very prominent part of storytelling in each of these keyframes. If you look at all of the shots together, you will notice that as they progress in their journey, the amount of sky visible is lesser with each shot, and subsequently the amount of fog and mist increases. What it adds is that feeling of getting trapped and cornered. Roderick and Edmund are getting deeper and deeper into trouble with each shot, as if they have nowhere else to escape. And having that additional fog with each shot also subconsciously adds to the mystery of unknown lands. While looking at the sped up videos, it might seem like I'm only doing one sketch for each of the shots and it's already there in my mind. It is actually not like that. I had numerous failed attempts before I reached to this part where the shots or the flow of these shots came to my mind. It honestly took me a while to put the story together in 6 keyframes in a meaningful way, while also challenging myself to do something different and new in terms of location and vibe for each of the shots. So yeah, this is how the 6 keyframes that I have look when placed side by side. I didn't even work really hard on the last few shots. I only wanted to get camera placed in a way that I can have a direction while I jump into 3D with these shots. So let's jump into Blender and talk about what Previs is and why you should do it. Previs is just a short for pre-visualization, and as the name suggests, it simply means pre-visualizing your shots using simple geometry before actually beginning to build your shots. And if you are someone who haven't done Previs for your personal project till now, I would suggest you can give it a try because it provides an early access to how the shots would look once translated into 3D, and makes the subsequent processes of actually building your shots much simpler. It also aids in planning the number of assets, the major assets that you're going to need to finish the entire project. So as you can see here, I'm trying to match the comp sketches that I did earlier as closely as possible when I'm doing the Previs. Alright, so once the Previs is done, this is how all my previous shots looked placed side by side. And now is a good time to um, start planning the number of assets uh, that will be needed for this entire project. This list is nothing final and it's subject to change as per requirement as I keep on doing the shots. So I like to categorize my list in terms of how and where I would get them. So for example, I will model and texture the ground, huts and cabins. 2-3 variations of that should be enough. Then the high columns on which the houses are resting. Then I need a stable for the horses, lamps, filler rocks, like the smaller rocks that are in the first couple of shots. Then I know I need a smoke alpha and a BG plate, which I will decide as I move along with the project. Then for the characters and horses, I have already bought the big, medium, small medieval asset pack, so that's covered. And the other things like dead trees and rocks and other medieval props like buckets, ropes, and all that I have in the last few shots will be done from Megascans. And the rest of the details that are gonna come later on is all painting and photo bashing that I'm gonna do in Photoshop. So with that covered, it's a good time to jump into modeling. So yeah, let's jump into Blender and talk about modeling. Alright, modeling and texturing. Just to let you guys know that I did not record any process video while modeling and texturing these assets, but what I can do is give you a quick demo of how I actually modeled these. And yeah, I hope that should cover everything I did in this stage because it is actually pretty simple. I started off with a cylinder, and here I am adding a character from the big, medium, small pack just for the scale. And then I'm adding some textures that I want to go with for this one that I got from textures.com. And I'm just doing a project from view or from whichever angle I need to texture it and adjust it accordingly in the UV editor. And same I'll do for the wood ends. I'll just add a different map for it and accordingly select from both sides and project it from view. So that will give me the wood ends. And then going forward, I'll add a color ramp to the maps and change the color to suit my needs. And this is exactly what I did for my project to make the woods look old and worn out. And I did this for multiple maps because I had 2 to 3 variation of textures that I was using for these logs. And then I would just go ahead and add a bump node to add some details to it, get the texture look a bit more detailed. And I did this for each of the maps that I have for the different logs in the project. And so yeah, once that was done, it was just a part of duplicating and rotating the asset in a way that it didn't seem duplicated. And after doing that, this is what I ended up with. So this is something that I built first, and then went on to the different kind of walls that I have here with the different sort of window cutouts and door cutouts. And from there I went on to build this roof and the huts that you can see here. For the stable, I just had to model this ramp and this base additionally. And if I just go to the render view, you can see how these assets look from close up. Like I have 3 materials in this entire asset, one for 2 variation of logs and one for the wood ends. So yeah, this is all the modeling and texturing that I did for this project, except for these 2 guys that I got from the big medium small medieval pack. And for those of you who would be interested, I also have these assets on sale on my Gumroad. Just the same asset that I showed you now, minus the big medium small characters. So you have your modular assets here. Then these are single pieces that you can just drag and drop into your project, and then these are pieces with separate parts if required. So yeah, these are all for a very nominal price. The link is in the description. You can go and check it. Do read the description that I have written there, because these are just for concept art purposes, and anybody who downloads it must do a paint over pass just to get a polish output. So yeah, that's a short disclaimer. So yeah, do check it out. Alright guys, this is it for this video. I hope you like it and found it useful. If you have any queries, just let me know in the comments below. And for the next part, we are gonna talk about some breakdown shots in Blender, and then move on to some Photoshop paint over, and I think that will be it for this series. So yeah, I will see you in the next part. Thank you.